Hey guys, welcome to episode 2 of Decoding Venture. Today we have a very exciting topic as well as a very exciting guest for you. And Very interestingly, we're all in very, very different parts of the world right now. And we're all going to make this a very valuable session for everyone who's tuning in. Um, would like to introduce our guest. We have Dr. Varma. Um,
One.
Dr. Varma, why don't you introduce yourself and your research interests?
Sure. So my name is Nikhil Varma. Thank you for calling me Dr. Varma Suraj. I rarely hear that, so it's nice to hear Dr. Varma. I am a professor of management in Ramapo College of New Jersey. I also have a background in computer science. I was a computer engineer, worked in the IT sector for about 15 years, have a master's also in computer science, and then I moved into management. However, my management work is very much around using technology for to support managerial decision making process. I teach operations management, analytics, and I am also working aggressively in the area of blockchain, specifically in supply chain area. We lost your voice, Suraj. We can't hear you.
Um, Very diverse and very vast fields that you have expertise in. So definitely, we'll have a lot of very important and interesting questions for you, as well as we will also be very interested in knowing a lot of things from you. Dennis, why don't you begin the session a little bit by introducing the topic, some of the things you found out through your readings and other things.
Sure. Today's topic, it's going to be about operational efficiency in high growth companies. And first, I think it's important to start off with how do you define operational efficiency? And that's primarily a metric that measures the efficiency of profit earned as a function of operational costs. But what does that really mean? It boils down simply to just saying productivity. A couple interesting things that I found out doing some research on the topic is when it comes to investment funds or private equity firms, typically operational efficiency is vastly different depending on what's their earnings. So for companies, for example, that are earning less than 2.5 billion or that have assets under management of less than 2.5 billion, they typically focus on headcount and talent acquisition. And for companies that are managing 15 billion or more, their focus is primarily on trying to onboard technology in order to increase their efficiency.
Yes, Suraj, go ahead.
Okay, very, very interesting perspective about how big a company is versus how what the operational goals for the company are. Maybe you could throw more light on that and how different companies approach their organization.
Sure. So, actually, operations of an organization, guys, is very tightly tied to the strategy of the organization, and the strategy is essentially how does the organization seek to differentiate itself. Okay? Now, when you talk about an organization's competitive strategy in the landscape, most of the organizations that we would be looking at, especially evolving organizations, differentiation is the key mantra there. They mostly are getting there into that landscape because of a differentiation aspect, and that is why you get to see that the organizations which are at the growth or the smaller phase are looking for talent acquisition process. However, there are some organizations, smaller organizations, who also have things like cost leadership. We want to be doing businesses based on economy of scales. For them, the operational effectiveness is very, very key, even more than hiring people. It is important that they remove all kinds of redundancies in their business processes. If their business processes have a lot of redundancies, if their business processes are not defined properly, what's going to happen is you bring in more people, you'll have more entropy. You have more entropy, your whole organizational strategy, which has to do with cost leadership, is not going to work. And then organizations work on the strategy of response. And response is where you are either very flexible or you are able to cater to the market's needs very fast. And in this kind of organizational competitive strategy, operations works a bit differently. Operations is mostly about innovations as to how do we get things fast to the market. So product management, product strategy, all these things come in big time in organizations which actually have this response as a competitive strategy. However, most of the organizations that we would be looking at, like, as entrepreneurs, when you look at the landscape, you hardly find an organization which says, oh, our purpose is to do business with economy of scales, be a low price provider. Nobody wants to be a new Walmart here. Okay, so everybody wants to be create some kind of a differentiation in the marketplace. And to be able to do that differentiation in that marketplace, it is important that you get the right kind of resources.
Okay, very, very interesting. I have a few questions for you, and these actually relate to startups because a lot of my experiences have been working for startups, and sort of observing the operational efficiencies as well as inefficiencies involved in those startups. So, few targeted questions. Um, would you have any examples of any startups in their early stages that succeeded mainly because they focused on the right operational strategies? My second question for you would be, uh, what kind of operational strategies can companies take from the start, which would help them succeed in the long run? Or do they have to be sort of responsive, as you said? Do they have to keep adapting? Or is there something that they can play from the beginning that would give them good rewards in the long term? Perhaps going for like more democratic and maybe transparent company structure, would that favor them, or do you think it just depends?
Okay, so I'll take one question. For the first question is organizations operations, right? See, mostly in startups, okay, operations also has a deep correlation with the culture of the organization. Okay, the way an organization runs actually leads to the culture that eventually builds into the organization, which is in a forming stage, and then eventually that is essentially becomes the culture. And I've seen quite a few organizations like that. One organization, unfortunately I'll not be able to give you the name because of my confidentiality reasons, but I can still tell you the business that they started. So the organization, I know them when they were a two-person shop. Started off a basement, and then they went on to be of course now their business is going down because of changes in technology, but they ended up becoming one of Canada's biggest game rental company. Okay, and their core philosophy was being very, very responsive to the customer right from the get-go. So I was my company in Canada was their technology partner. Essentially, we took away all their technology development piece, and I had a lot of discussion sessions with them based on for their strategic positioning. And every time I spoke to them, they would look at the customer value chain. Okay, they would look at, okay, what should I do to increase the value of the customer, essentially? So the whole idea of price is that if I pay $5 for something and I perceive the price of that thing to be $10, my satisfaction level is going to be very high, right? And the same goes in service, and services being intangible is slightly more difficult to judge. Everybody has a different kind of a yardstick for service. But if you are able to kind of get the pulse from your customer, so understand the customer value chain. Okay, when you look at the customer value chain, you kind of find out things which actually matters to the customer, do some kind of a root cause analysis and find out, okay, you know what, this is stemming in from this kind of a problem, and if I'm able to solve this particular problem, the customers are going to be happy, right? So you just don't want to roll a solution for the sake of rolling a solution. You just don't want to roll a feature for the sake of rolling out a feature. You want to make sure that that feature has an impact to your customer value chain. Yeah, so that is what I have seen in quite a few companies in different kinds of landscape. Okay, one was a responsive company, the other one had to do with price sensitivity, and for them, they were mostly looking at ways of reducing prices within the organization. How can we reduce price? Where is it that the price is going over? So if we just handle that for now, they used a divide and conquer kind of a strategy, and just kind of isolate the piece which is most expensive. How can we reduce the price? Is it possible to reduce the price? Will there be a degradation in the quality? If there is no degradation in the quality, but if we do some kind of an innovation to reduce the price at that particular juncture, we will be able to gain operational efficiency, right? Your second question was with regards to, can you just remind me one more time, please?
This is more catered towards companies just starting out, building out their culture, and people making the first step. Because one thing I've noticed in technology is the culture translates a lot into the operational efficiency, and it can make or break the startup in the long run as well as the short run. So maybe what kind of suggestions do you have for those kinds of entrepreneurs and companies starting off?
So the thing is that it is very important. In fact, when a company incorporates, right, even in United States, you have to define who you are. What are you going to do, right? You have to be very clear of what you want to do. Essentially, that is where you define your organization's mission, your vision, your objectives at a very high level, and that should stem into operations. Contrary to what you said, I believe that your operations would lead into a culture formation rather than your culture would have later on there would be an interaction. But to start with, I still feel this is not a chicken and egg problem. It's not the culture that would actually define the operational efficiency or operations in an organization, but it is the operations, how you run the company, which would actually formulate your culture. Okay, if you have an environment where people take ownerships, okay, which is kind of, if there is a problem, I'll take it, like in a Scrum model, right? There are things up there, it is a more democratic kind of a thing. I'll call out and say, yeah, I'll take this task, right? And then it would be an organization where you don't have to delegate work. People would pick up work. So it depends on how you set the wheels up, how you set the whole structure up, and then things would start falling in line. Of course, you'll have to come on and fine tune it once in a while, but the way you've set it up, that is how things would run. Yes.
I definitely agree. I think I see the point there. I'll pass over the screen to Dennis.
Yeah, I just want to add a follow-up question on that, because it seems like the overarching theme here is that it's important to be agile in this process. Would you agree?
I completely agree. I'm a pure agilist, so I cannot disagree.
Yeah. And it makes sense for this space because you need to be able to respond to changes within your organization and external to your organization with regards to your customers. So you have to be agile if you want to continue to have innovation in the field and stand out from competitors in your space.
Yes, yes, and I always tell that to my students, right? Is if things outside your organization are changing faster than things inside your organization, you would cease to exist. Okay,
Exactly.
so the velocity inside your organization has to be more than what is happening. And if you're just responsive, if there is something that external environment happen, of course there are certain environmental things that you might not anticipate, and you have to have the provisioning to be able to handle that. But if you are just a reactive organization, something happening outside and you make a change, something happening outside and you make a change, that's not a sustainable strategy. A sustainable strategy is, how do I increase the velocity within my organization so that the things that are changing in my macro environment is much slower than how things are happening within my organization. Yeah.
Do you have any tips on how you can increase the velocity within your organization with respect to small startups wanting to turn into high growth companies?
See, I feel that there is one thing with the new generation, and I think I have grown out of the new generation, so I'm not a part of the new generation anymore. I'm talking about the younger developers of the current times. There is one thing which is missing big time, and that is communication. And the whole definition of communication has taken a big change. People like to talk offline or through messaging system, but this whole human interaction is a very key ingredient in, to be able to have some kind of a cohesion between people. So whatever it takes, I have worked in different organizations where people did not want to speak. It was a very open environment. Okay, in fact, it was so open that we did not have cubicles. It was like an open sitting area. So when I joined that organization, I thought, oh, it's so cool, now I can go and talk to anyone. And then I was speaking to someone, and then I get a big stare from that person, and then I realized that, oh, actually there are certain rules of engagement that I have to follow. The rule of engagement was that if a person has his headset on, his or her headset on, which means they are in their zone, you should not be troubling them. Okay, so you could have these informal things embedded into the traditional model, right, wherein you could still communicate the way you like to communicate, but you still have a person whom you can see physically. With different locations and other things, I do understand that that could be a challenge, but I feel velocity, and all the teams that I've managed in the past, I was also a program manager, project manager for bigger teams in agile environment. And when we actually spoke to each other, sometimes even outside the project room, like, coffee, maybe go out and bowl, have a drink together, whatever, doesn't matter. But that relationship actually made we gained a lot with how we were able to innovate, make changes, help each other, take ownership, no finger pointing. Everybody is, either we go down as together or we succeed as a team. There's no winner and loser kind of a thing.
Yeah.
That's a very interesting point that you make about communication and the workplace. In fact, I think as the days progress and as the years progress, I think the workplace is going to become more decentralized and more remote. There's already an upcoming trend with remote workplaces, remote workforces, and freelancer options for people to work as in a non-committal manner to a company, and that is affecting the operations also. I think in a
Absolutely.
certain degree, the consensus on among people who have remote jobs is they felt sort of alone and alienated from the workforce. They didn't feel like they were really part of the workforce, even if they had worked like years working a remote job. So I think you have a very interesting point there.
Yeah, and I'm not against remote work. I think that remote work definitely brings in more flexibility and maybe increases your overall productivity. But when we talk about velocity and things where a person-person interaction is going to make a difference, it is important that we somehow include the human interaction, right? Like, as a professor, I hate to respond to emails to students. mean, I'm old school, okay? I tell them, if you have a problem, why don't you just come to me? That email to and fro, I mean, of course, you can reach out to me if it's a Saturday or a Sunday, but if you come to my office, chat with me for a minute, I can resolve the problem or I can tell you where to go. But this email, I might not understand what you're trying to tell me. You might not understand what I'm trying to tell you. We all know about 70%, 80%, I don't know the data, but something around that number are the number of emails that get misinterpreted, right? Because people think something, and you write something, and people conceive something out of it, and then you get into all kinds of trouble.
Email is one of those tricky forms of communication where it's not set up for feedback the same way that face-to-face conversation is.
Yeah.
And so interpretation can happen.
And face-to-face communication also gives you other metadata besides the communication, right? You get the body language, you get so many other things. Those things actually constitute a whole ecosystem of understanding that you develop, right? So it's very important that face-to-face interaction has to be there. I'm a big proponent of that.
Absolutely. Interesting statistic is about 70% of what we understand when we communicate with someone is nonverbal.
You see? So it's the body language of the person makes a huge difference. Like, assume that instead of having a video communication right now, we were having a audio communication. I think the discussions, the acknowledgements, like, you nodding your head, I'm smiling when you're saying something, all those signals add to that whole experience of how it's going. Like, how are we able to communicate with each other, right? So likewise, when you have a person right next to you, even better.
Yeah. Well, we've covered a lot of topics, I think, from operational efficiency to communication and everything in between. Are there any final thoughts that we may have before we close out?
Just one last subtopic that I was hoping to cover in this discussion. This is sort of just a very, very high level overview of some project management strategies that are employed in tech companies. Maybe if, like for anyone new to entrepreneurship or somebody just taking the first steps, this might be useful as just a high level overview of some topics in project management. So I just wanted to sort of understand some strategies for project management, some things that are successful, and maybe some recommendations from Dr. Varma.
So see, project management in this day and age has also transformed a lot. Okay, of course, you must have seen the whole transition from the traditional waterfall to Scrum and Agile rather, and then Scrum being most prominent in that group. And when we talk about Scrum, then project management goes out of traditional project management practices. Although, just to let you know that PMI is getting big into Agile methodologies now, because they are also realizing that project management processes and the traditional style has to evolve in the current day and age. For a new organization to be able to have some kind of project management put in place, I think it is less of project management, and depends on what is the kind of organization again. But if you're talking about a product-based system, we should mostly talk about the product management aspect more than the project management, as to whether they have defined the product functionalities based on market, or those product functionalities are defined by somebody who is wearing R&D hat and thinks I'm so cool that whatever I do, the people are going to buy. That is where I have seen, like in my product management, I had process improvement, product management consulting experience, and I can't again give you the names of the companies, unfortunately, because they're big ones. But the most of the places where I saw the problem was that I myself am a computer engineer, but I feel that was the arrogance of the computer engineers, thinking that whatever they are making is so cool that once they make it, the market is just waiting for it. However, sometimes they don't being simple is very difficult sometimes. Just being able to understand the market and the market needs might be very simple. So if you are able to define the nice linkage between market and your product, and then based on the linkage between market and product, you do some kind of an opportunity analysis. Essentially, your product management is just to basically roll out the high opportunity functionalities, features in your product as soon as possible. Now, you can follow an agile model, you can follow whatever model you have to, but just to bring it to a more structured approach, you have to just make sure that you are closing the loop, essentially. Okay, this is not somebody asking you to build a house, but you are making something which might make a difference to somebody's life. But you should not make that assumption, but you should make that deduction. That is what I feel.
Well, okay. So I think I learned a lot myself today. Thanks for sharing all your knowledge and views. I think we are hitting the half-hour mark, and it's also generally noticed that viewers tend to lose attention after the first like 40 minutes. So we try to keep the show contained within 30.
Sure.
So thank you, Dr. Varma, for joining us and shedding so much light and knowledge. Thank you, Dennis. I hope you have a nice weekend ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks to all the viewers who tuned in. We will be back next week.
I think we lost you a little, Suraj, there.
Oh yeah, I was just sort of flipping the cam to everyone. So yeah, see you guys next week. And yeah, next week we have a little surprise for you and a very good topic as well. So see you next week.
Thank you, Suraj. Thank you, Dennis. Nice meeting you. Bye.
You too. All right. Bye.
Bye.